All right. So, welcome everybody. My name is Christopher Jones. I am going to give you a little presentation today about fingerprints of the hand. So, I have been studying hand reading for over 40 years, and the most important features of the hand are the fingerprints, which you probably know. You have fingerprints on the end of your fingers, and you probably know two things about your fingerprint patterns. One thing that everybody knows is that the fingerprint patterns are unique to everybody. So everybody's fingerprint patterns are unique to each person. And the second thing that's important about fingerprint patterns is that they don't change over time. So they are permanent markers of our identity over time. So when we can identify what those fingerprint patterns are, we can learn something about the kind of characteristics that we have in ourselves that will endure throughout our whole lives. So what we're going to do today is we're going to try and identify what the fingerprint patterns are that you have on your hands. And then once you have an idea of what they are, we'll give you some idea of what they mean as well. Okay? All right. So now, whilst there are an infinite number of fingerprint patterns, like because everybody has a unique set of fingerprint patterns, there are actually only seven types of fingerprint patterns, or seven main types of fingerprint patterns. So it's not that complicated, but we do need to look at what those are. And I will bring some slide on the show now so you can see what the fingerprint patterns are and what they look like. All right, let's do that. Can everybody see that illustration? Can you see that? Give me a thumbs up if you can see it. Cool. All right. So the three main fingerprint patterns are called the loop, the arch, and the whirl. So the loop is the most common fingerprint pattern, and you can see that it basically looks like a wave. I think that's the easiest way to imagine it. It's like a wave crashing up, if you can imagine that. The second most common fingerprint pattern is the whirl, which is the spiral pattern that goes around like that. And the third most common pattern is the arch, which is like a little bridge or a little mountain that looks like that. So we're looking at the shape of the pattern that occurs on the end of the fingers, and we're trying to discern whether they have one of these distinctive forms or not, the arch, the loop, or the whirl. Now, how do we know that they're different? Well, we can look at the shape, but we can also look at what is known as the triradius, which is this little triangular formation here. So if you look carefully on the side of the print, you can see they make a little triangular formation just here. Can you see what I'm pointing to on the side there? So that's called a triradius. This is the characteristic that tells us the type of fingerprint pattern. The arch has no triradius. The loop has one, and the whirl has two. Unfortunately, this diagram doesn't show two, but there's a second one just about here, like that. So the way we need to look at for a combination of the little triangles, and we need to look for for that and for the shape. So we're looking for two things when we look at the fingerprint pattern. Most of you will have loops. So have a look at your fingerprint patterns and see if you can see the wave. So look on your finger. See if you can see the triangle. You might want to use your phone to shine the light on your phone. That's a really good way to do it, to get the extra light. See if you can see the fingerprint on your index finger. Have a look at your fingerprint pattern now. Try and view the ridges in the finger and see if you can see. the shape of it. There are more than these three, but these are the most common three. So it's very likely you will have one of these three. All right, so start looking at the fingerprints. All right. In addition to those three main patterns, there are a few minor patterns as well. Oh, no, this is a variations on the ulnar loop. So most of you will have ulnar loops. So the ulnar loop, as I said, you can see it on the print here. If you look carefully, you can see the triangular formation here, and you can see that the loop comes up and over like that. You can see the little triangular formation here. So these are real life fingerprints. You can see that the pattern comes up and around like that. Again, the triradius on the side, the triangle on the side, and the pattern coming over like that. And you can see it makes a little sort of pocket inside like that. Can you see that? Is that all clear for you to see? Can you see that on your finger? Who's got that on their index finger? Has anybody got that on their index finger? You can put a thumb up if you've got it on your index finger. All right, if you haven't got it on your index finger, look at your little finger. This pattern is really common on the little finger. Like about 85% of little fingers will have it. So first of all, we need to kind of get to identify the fingerprint patterns. It's a little bit technical to see these, but once we clearly see the different designs, then we'll be able to work out what fingerprint pattern we have on each of our fingers. So the loop fingerprint pattern has one triradius, whereas the arch fingerprint pattern has no triradius. So you can see here with the arch, it's just a ridge that goes up and down, up and down. And there's no little triangle formation in the arch. So here's some variations. Here are the arch variations. So this is some good examples of lots of different types of arches. Can you see how they all make these little little mountains or little hills? They all go up and down like that. If you've got one of these, it's most likely going to be on your index finger. The most common place to find an arch is on the index finger. And then the third pattern is the whirl pattern. And here you can see the two triad radii very clearly. Can you see the little triangle formations on both sides of the print? People say the whirl is very pretty. People like whirls. They look quite attractive. They're quite intriguing in their shape. But you can see sometimes it's a very tight little spiral pattern, and sometimes it makes a nice big round circular motion like that. But you always get the two little triangles on either side. So that's the first thing you have to look for. Have you got a triradius? Is it one triradius, two triradius, or no triradius? And then look for the shape.
Jean, uma
Who's got a
dúvida.
whirl? Who's got a whirl
Todos
fingerprint?
os dedos, todos os dedos seriam iguais.
If you've got a whirl fingerprint pattern, the most likely place you're going to find a whirl is on your ring finger. So have a look at your ring finger. You may have three or four or five or six whirls. That's also possible. So this is the thing, the fingerprint patterns occur on different fingers. They don't all occur on all the fingers. You may have different fingerprint patterns on every finger. All right. So let's go to the two triradii from this on this fingerprint pattern. So here's some examples of the different types of whorls that you might see. Okay. So as I said, some whorls are very tight little circles, like this one, and then some of them are really long elliptical shapes like that. You can see that there's quite a lot of variation in the shape. That doesn't matter. Um, so they can be as long as they've got a spiral in the middle, and as long as it's got the two triradii on the sides, it's a whorl. So you need to look for the little triangles, and you need to look for the spiral shape. All right. So these three fingerprint patterns make up 85% of all fingerprints. So the majority of fingerprint patterns will be one of these three types. And it's what's interesting about these patterns is they're distributed differently amongst different people around the world. So loops are most common in the hands of Europeans, and in the hands of Europeans, you find about 60 to 65% of fingerprint patterns are loops, and whorls are about 20%. But in New Zealand, it's very interesting because in New Zealand, the Māori population, the indigenous people of New Zealand, they have about 65% whorls and correspondingly less loops. So you get different distributions of loops and whorls and arches amongst different populations around the world. And I think that's important that describes something of the characteristics of the kind of societies that people around the world create by virtue of the fingerprint patterns that they have. The highest incidence of arches were found amongst tribal people in continental Africa. So let's go on to looking at how to identify the other 15% of fingerprint patterns. So there are four minor patterns, and the four minor patterns are the tented arch, which is here. I'll go through these in more detail. The peacock's eye, the radial loop, and the double loop. The radial loop is exactly like the ordinary loop, but you can see that's the loop that goes around one way, but the radial loop goes in the opposite direction. So this is the index finger in this person's hand, and the only place where the radial loop occurs commonly is on the index finger. So you can see that it's on the thumb, it's open on the thumb side and it points towards the little finger. It goes that way. It's a very distinctive pattern. It's the fourth most common fingerprint pattern, but it only occurs commonly on the ring, on the index finger. It's not on any other fingers, really. It's very rare on the other fingers. Mostly you find it only on the index finger. So it's about 22% of index finger. It occurs in about 2% of the middle finger and almost not at all on any of the other fingers at all. So if you have this pattern, you're going to see it only if it's on your index finger. So we'll check that. So you might have a wave on your index finger, but you need to check the direction that it goes in. Does the wave go up and point towards the thumb, or does the wave go up and point away from the thumb? So you need to check the directionality of that fingerprint on your index finger if it's a loop. One's called a radial loop, one's called an ulnar loop, and they mean quite different things. Then there's another pattern you can get is called a double loop, and the double loop looks like this. Can you see how it goes down and up like that? So the double loop is two loops going in two directions. So there's one loop going up and around like that, and the double loop has another loop going over the top of it. So it's like two loops going in two different directions. You might see that this is like a sort of yin yang sign, if you know what that looks like. It looks like that. There you go, something like that. So it looks like a yin yang sign. So that's a good way to think about this pattern. This pattern is like the yin yang sign of the fingerprint patterns. And this if you have this pattern, it's most likely you'll see it on your thumb. It's a great pattern for creating indecision and duality for people, especially when it's found on the thumb. Right? Yeah, about 3% of index fingers have this pattern. So here are some variations on it. So again, like with the other patterns, they can be big loops like this one here, making a big swathe through it, or it can be a tight little loop like that. So you can still see the yin yang effect. Can you see the yin yang sign in the middle of this pattern? If I just draw it around like that, it looks like a little yin yang sign, I think. People say that people with these patterns are very spiritual. I think they kind of are in a way, um, because what they like to do is they like to sort of see how opposites reconcile, and they're very fond of integration. Most commonly seen on the thumb. Then there's a pattern called a central pocket whirl, which is a kind of like a little whirl inside a loop. You'll see these mostly on the ring finger. Um, I count these as just variant whirl patterns, really. They are like a whirl because it's got this spiral shape in the middle. The difference is it's kind of like a whirl inside a loop. So it's kind of, there's the loop pattern, and there's a little whirl on the inside. So you can get this variation too, but it's really effectively a whirl. They're quite rare on most of the fingers except the ring finger. So you won't see this on your hand unless it's on your ring finger likely. But we'll have a look and we'll have a see. Let's have a check. And then the rarest fingerprint pattern of all is what's called the tented arch. And this is a pattern with a central thrust in it like that. So it's kind of like goes up and it has the ridges that go up and over it like that. You can see that same thing here, big spike in the middle and the ridges coming up and over that. But this is really, really, really rare, this fingerprint pattern. Like you will find this on hardly any fingerprints at all. It's uncommon even on the index finger. So it's not a pattern that you're going to see very often, but if you do find it, it's probably only going to be on your index finger because it almost doesn't occur anywhere else on the hand. So here are some variations of it. So you can see the the thrust here going up and over like that. So it looks like the ridge pole of a tent. Has a very distinctive meaning. All right, so what I want to do now that we've kind of looked at all the different fingerprint patterns, what I'd like to do is kind of invite you to kind of look at your own fingerprint patterns and try and work out which fingerprint patterns you've got. So maybe we can just do a little moment of doing that, do a little bit of identification, and then we can come back to talking about what they mean. So can everybody see their own fingerprints? All right. So try and work out whether you've got, first of all, whether you've got, let's just look at the fingerprint on the index finger because that's the most important finger. Okay. So have a look at that fingerprint pattern on there and see if you can work out what shape it is. If you're not sure, you can put it up to the camera and maybe we can have a look and see it together. Yeah. If you're older, your mum's shaking her head, Joelle. If you're older, it can be difficult to see fingerprint patterns because they get a bit fainter. But what you can see, Philippa here, she's got a very bright light. That's really helpful. So use a bright light or maybe your torch on your phone. That's really helpful. Okay, what have you got there? Juliana's trying to show us her fingerprint. What have you got there, Juliana?
Eu consigo falar, mas eu não sei se ele vai me entender. Esse daí você que tem que traduzir.
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah, I could hear her as well. Yeah. Okay. I think you have to go back to Portuguese for them to hear you.
Oi,
So
tá.
Juliana, if you speak, I will better. I should better. I should better.
Sim,
I should better see
Christopher.
you.
Na verdade, ele falando desse último que é raro, do indicador, e para mim eu só vejo esse último no meu indicador. Essa tal da tenda aí. Porque eu achei que, inclusive, esse dedo indicador fosse arte no início, mas daí eu vi que ele tem um triângulozinho, mas ele é quase que embaixo do, do arco, né? Ele não fica para o lado igual os outros. Os outros eles fazem a ondinha e tem o triângulo do lado. O indicador não, o indicador é meio que quase que embaixo, assim. É maluco. E aí eu tenho na mão esquerda o
A-
anelar e o
Ask her to
dedo
put the finger to the
médio
camera. Maybe I
na
can see.
câmera. Eu boto botado mesmo? Não vai
No,
dar para ver.
not so close, but further
Não.
back.
Peraí, deixa eu pegar uma lanterna para ver se melhora.
Yeah, good idea.
Não sei se vai dar para ver. Eu acho que não vai dar para ver. Eu tinha massinha em casa,
Go
eu
go
devia ter
back a bit.
feito. Não dá para ver. Não vai dar para ver.
Okay. The other way we can do this, that we can make this work, is if you take a photograph of your fingerprint and then we can share the image. That's another way to do this. So with your camera, take a photo.
Sim. Ah, tá. Peraí. Deixa eu ver se eu consigo tirar uma foto.
All right, everybody wants to have a tented arch because it's the rarest fingerprint pattern to be found. It's true, everybody wants one, but it's not necessarily the best fingerprint to have. So I will talk a little bit about the fingerprint patterns and what they mean, and then you can get an idea of that, okay? But I think looking at that, the best way we're going to do this is we want to share the fingerprints, if you can take a photograph and then we can share, you can display them on your screen and we can share the screen. So maybe you want to try that way of doing it. All right, so let me talk a little bit about the meaning of the different fingerprints, because I think that's really important that we do that first of all. Um, so let's go back to the main. Okay, oh, there we go. Last one. There we go. All right. So the different fingerprint patterns have different significations. The loop is the most common fingerprint pattern, and the loop is ruled by the element water. So people have lots of loops are very sociable and like being amongst other people. There's an easygoing characteristic that they have. They like to connect with people. Having a sort of friendship circle is important. Having a kind of sense of relationship to other people. It's like wanting to belong is a really big part of their life, wanting to be part of something. And this is in contrast to the whirl, which is, because of its nature, is very self-contained and very private and very individual. People with lots of whirls want to spend a lot of time on their own, want to do things in their own way. People with lots of loops want to do things with other people and join in all the time. So there's this kind of tension that exists between these two fingerprint patterns. The loop is sociable and the whirl is antisocial in many respects because the whirl prides itself on being different and prides itself on being separate from other people, whereas the loop enjoys the company of other people and wants to be amongst other people. So it's interesting that most people have loops because most people prefer to be in the company of other people. We human beings are social animals, as they like to say. So when you see someone with lots of loops, you know that's very important part of their life, that they want to be a part of something, they want to join in something, they want to be connected to other people. There's an ease of assimilation. The loop kind of shows a mind that takes things in easily, is very accepting, is very inclusive. Democratic is a very good word to describe people with lots of loops because it's about the people, the people, the people, the people. That's what's important for people with lots of loops. Are we all in this together? Are we working this together? Whereas the world has the kind of opposite philosophy. It's all about being independent, about being self-reliant, about being autonomous, having freedom. And the more worlds you've got, the more that's important to a person. So having four or more worlds is a kind of good indication that you're a very world type person. So if you're counting up the worlds, you want to look at the worlds on the index finger and the ring finger and then the thumb are the three most common places you find whirls. Once people start getting four or more whirls on their two hands, then the whirl pattern starts dominating and the person wants to spend more time on their own, wants to do things their own way and not want to do things with other people. It is possible to find people with eight or nine or 10 whirls, but that's unusual. And the more worlds that person has, the more they want to spend time on their own, live by themselves. They're like hermits. They spend all their time doing their own thing and going their own way. And they don't really care about socializing with other people. That's not really what they're designed to do. So these two patterns describe something of the relationship patterns that we create with other people. So loops are groups and worlds are individuals. So people with whirls tend to have one-on-one relationships and very few friends. People with lots of loops tend to have lots of different friendships in lots of different groups, and that sense of connection and belonging to a big group of people is really, really important to them. So that's it's a very simple way to kind of work it out. If you know that you're somebody who likes spending time on your own, you've probably got lots of whirls. If you like spending, if friendships and belonging and being part of something is really important to you, then loops are really important. So Philippa Silva is in is in Lisbon. So and she said, "Oh, it'd be lovely to join in with all the people speaking on chirology in Portuguese." So so because she's got loops. So this is a really good loop motivation to do something. Is like I feel like I'm connected to people who do hand reading in Portuguese. It's a really good loop motivation. She's smiling because she knows exactly that's why her motivation is. So um, And Philippa, I think Philippa's got whirls, if I remember rightly. Philippa just does her own. Philippa in Wellington does her own thing in her own way. So she's the only English speaking person here. So
Two whirls,
you got two whirls. Yeah, that's
only two
enough.
whirls, and eight arches, but on
Oh, well,
my
okay.
thumb
Well, you want
and my ring finger.
okay. The whirl on the thumb is the classic indication. So so Philippa's the person who shouldn't be here because she's not Portuguese and she's not Brazilian. But she is, and she is because she's got a whirl on her thumb, and people with whirls on their thumb always do their own thing in their own way. So where you find the whirl is important as well. We'll go back a little bit more in detail in a moment, but just to finish on these three main prints first. So, so loops are people and groups, whirls are individuals doing their own thing. Arches are about family and security and stability. The arches are the providers in the world. So where you see arches, you've got the carers, the nurturers, the teachers, the people who are the pillars of society, providing and supporting. I always think of the arch as like a bridge, like it's the arch that holds up the bridge, and the arch is very very strong. The resilience of the arch, like architecturally, it's a very strong geometry and the arch holds up the bridge holds up the road holds up the traffic. So this is the supporter. This pattern is someone who will care for and provide and support for themselves and for their family. So whereas the loop likes people, but the arch likes people if they're related to them. So there's the kind of I always think of it as tribal. There's a very strong need for the tribal connection. So family is really important to people with arches. And that sense of security and stability that comes with that, the sort of close-knit family group is really important to people with arches. And so they have a very different orientation towards life than other people. So they're not common. The arches are not common. The arch is only, in European population, the arch only occurs on about 8% of fingers. That's really relatively rare. The only two largely patterns that are found commonly are the loop and the whirl. Those two here, they're very common. But arches are the third most common pattern, but they're very distinctive in terms of their orientation and needs. And another really big thing for arches is, well, it's a couple of things. I'm thinking justice. Justice is really important. Like things being fair is always really important to people with arches. And reliability is really important. So when I say reliability, I mean that in lots of ways. I mean that emotionally. They create emotional bonds with people that are very loyal. They're very loyal to their friends and their family. But they want reliability in knowledge as well. So you tend to find arches interested in history or science, archaeology, or criminology, subjects which are basically to do with can we find out about how things work and how societies are run, and can we understand the rules of things, which is why there's interest in science. We want everything to be grounded on a reliable and solid base. That's the arch. It wants to be solid and reliable all the time in everything. The loop wants to be flexible and adaptable and connected all the time. And the world wants to be independent and autonomous and free. So sovereignty, freedom, and autonomy is really important for the world. So can you see how that these are descriptions from the shape of the pattern? Can you see how that's coming out? Just to clarify that again. So the whirl is self-contained. It's in a circle like that. The loop is like a wave, so it's like flowing like that. And then the arch is holding things up and supporting things like that. So that's how we approach the interpretation of the pattern. What we have with the fingerprint patterns is we have a kind of energetic signature. So I think that the cause of the fingerprint patterns is the way that consciousness impresses upon us when we're born, because the fingerprint patterns form in the womb. They form around the 16th week of gestation, so about 4 months of fetal development, and then that's when the fingers are forming, and then the fingerprints form. And this is, to me, this is like an impression of the energetics of consciousness coming through. If you look at the sea, when the tide goes out, you can see how the sea has made ripples in the sand on the beach. And that is the effect of the water moving over the sand. And I think that's a very good analogy for consciousness's effect upon the body, and it kind of consolidates and leaves this impression within the physical form of the body on our fingerprints. And so that's the energy that we have. That's how the energy moves within us. So it either moves kind of very intensely and focused, like a whirlwind or a spiral, or it's very fluid, like a wave moving up and down like that, or it has a sort of desire to kind of hold and support, which is like the arch. It's hardly moving at all. There's very little movement in the arch pattern. So it's quite a good way to think about that. So when it comes to the minor patterns, we can employ the same motif and we can see them doing the same thing. So with the tented arch, what we have, whoops, we've gone back the wrong way. I'll go back again. All right, with the tented arch, we have this thrust. So the tented arch is like a volcano. The tented arch is someone who's very enthusiastic and expressive, has a desire to lead and to initiate. It's a really rare pattern to find, but when you have it, they're usually quite excitable, intense kind of people with a big focus on something in their life. They've got a mission that they need to fulfill. So that's kind of like that gives this idea again, this energy is thrusting up through the fingerprint like that. Um, and you only ever find this on the index finger. You almost never find it on any other finger except the index finger. So it's all about their personal leadership and their personal authority and their personal vision. The peacock's eye, well, that's a whirl inside a loop, and I think of that very much like just basically as a whirl. It's a kind of softer whirl. Can you imagine being an independent person who wants to be in a group of people at the same time? That's the combination that it represents. It's got the individuality of the whirl and the gregariousness, the sociability of the loop. But it's, I think, on balance, the way that works is the whirl tends to dominate. The most famous example, probably, I can tell you about with a peacock's eye, is Jimi Hendrix, who had it on his index finger. So Jimi Hendrix is obviously very famous for someone with a unique guitar style, but he was also very much influenced by the zeitgeist of his time and was very important social figure, obviously, in the late 1960s. So he's kind of a good example of the combination of those two patterns together. But if you have one of these, I would err on the side of the side of the world. We tend to think of Jimi Hendrix not as a social metaphor and an icon. We think of him as someone outrageously original, different, and brilliant, which is kind of much more the world characteristic. So it's probably good to think of the this pattern as a whirl. The radial loop pattern, well, the radial loop pattern occurs again mainly on the index finger. So when it occurs on the index finger, it shows a very person who's very strongly influenced by forces from the outside. These are really sensitive people, very responsive people, people who are uh, aware of the other people's reactions to them and are very affected by the people, situations, and circumstances around them. As I mentioned before, this pattern only occurs really on the index finger. And the index finger is to do with our sense of self-confidence. So people with the radial loop on their index finger, their sense of self-confidence is very strongly affected by people around them. So you find this pattern in what people call empaths. You find it on carers, counselors, people who are very responsive to the needs of other people, but who also can get easily overwhelmed by other people. So they have a curious mechanism by which they can be very defensive sometimes, particularly men. Men are supposed to be strong and not vulnerable, but when they have this pattern, they feel very vulnerable, so they get very defensive. Women are allowed to be sensitive and empathic, so when they have this pattern, they tend to take on too much from other people, and it can end up in people-pleasing behavior. It's one of the most difficult fingerprint patterns to have. And if you have it, it will only be on your index finger. As I said before, it hardly occurs on any other fingerprint pattern, any other finger. So it's really important to notice if you have this pattern. As I said, the loop, you need to look at the loop. Which direction does it go in? Does it point towards the little finger or does it point towards the thumb? The radial loop points towards the little thing, towards the little finger. So this is on the left hand. This is a left hand finger index. Does anybody have this pattern on their fingers that they can see? You have a radial loop on your index, Philippa? Hang on, you're muted. You have to speak up. I can't hear you.
Sorry, no, I have a peacock's eye on my ring finger.
Yes, that's the most common place to find the peacock's eye. Yep, that's true. Has anybody got a radial loop on the index finger? Oh, you can't
Eu
see. You're
tenho
not sure.
radial no mindinho, no dedo anelar, no coisa e no polegar.
Juliana, I'm going to ask you to take a photograph of your
Ele
fingerprints because you're
ele
very
vem
keen to
aqui, ó,
learn.
ele vem
If you can take
do
a photograph,
dedinho para dentro. Outra
if you can
mão
take a
vem.
photograph, I can see them.
Eu mando, eu tirei uma foto aqui, eu vou mandar.
All right, the last print to look at is the double loop. And the double loop is, as we saw before, these two loops going in two different directions like this. So the double loop creates duality and uncertainty. And the most common place to find it is on the thumb. So if you have a double loop, it's probably on your thumb. And if it's on your thumb, it's going to give you a sense of indecision about your life and where you want to go in your life and what you want to do. If it's on your index finger, which is rare but possible, then it creates a sense of confusion in your sense of self-identity. But it's always seeing things from two points of view because you got the up and you've got the down. So you can see both the yin and the yang. You can see the positive and the negative. So this is somebody who takes some time to make decisions because they're weighing up the pros and cons. It results in people being very good mediators, very good at adjudication because it's the ability to see both sides of the coin and to weigh up all those options. But it's relatively rare. As I said, these fingerprint patterns are relatively rare when they're found on any other fingers other than the thumb for the double loop. So it's kind of quite important to understand that the different patterns occur on different fingers in different distributions. So the radial loop, as I said, only occurs commonly on the index finger. So you can see this is the radial loop on the index finger on the right hand. So have a look, see if you got that one. The almost not any on any other digits at all. The double loop occurs on 3% of index fingers, but is most commonly seen on the thumb.
Pois é, tô na dúvida agora, gente. Eu quero mandar.
So the peacock's eye, as Philippa said, well, that occurs mainly on the ring finger, but very, very rare and on any other finger. So if you have a peacock's eye, you have a very unusual fingerprint as well. And the tented arch fingerprint pattern is so rare, it only occurs on about 4% of index fingers and almost never on any other digit at all. So you won't necessarily see that on any fingers at all. It's almost non-existent on the thumb, 0.0006%. That's how rare it is on the thumb. So we can say we're never going to see that. I've never seen one. So that's the four minor patterns. The radial loop's about 5% of the total. The double loop's about 4% of the total fingerprint patterns. the central pocket whirl or peacock's eye is 3%, and the tented arch is 1%. So they're all very rare as compared to the ulnar loop, the whirl, and the arch. So this is the numbers here are population from England. So this is a British population sample. It's fairly common amongst European distributions of people around the world. So it's probably a good working number. It's not true for indigenous people in Africa or in Polynesia or in remote parts of the world. They have different distributions, but that accounts for 99% of all known fingerprints. Okay, so there are some very weird fingerprint patterns. I'm going to show you these as well. Would you like to see some more weird fingerprint patterns? Because there are some extremely interesting variations of fingerprint patterns. All right, so I can show you some interesting designs too. All right, so there's some patterns are called Newton loops. So the Newton loop is like a loop that falls over. You can see it on this handprint here. You can see how it's kind of falling over like that. It kind of goes up and it kind of falls down. Really, really rare, less than 1% in the hands of men. There is another pattern called a lateral pocket loop, which is where you get two loops coming in from the side like that. Yeah, going up and over. As you can see in this fingerprint here, got one going like that, and then you got another one going like that. So these are all really rare fingerprint patterns. It's 0.154%. It's incredibly rare. And then other patterns become crazy. You get these crazy formations whereby you get the pattern doing kind of crazy things in here, and it's not quite sure. This one looks like a little mushroom, I think. And it's kind of like an interesting little shape. But there are crazy patterns that don't really fall into any of the other major pattern types. So you just need to know that they can exist. And these are accidentals, these are tiny little whirls. Again, very, very rare patterns. So there are the anomalies, and sometimes fingerprint patterns become unclassifiable and they're kind of very weird in malformed ways. And sometimes you get fingerprint patterns which run right off the end of the finger. So you can see here that the fingerprint pattern just goes straight off the end like that. Doesn't do what fingerprints normally do, which is to curve over at the top. So that one's a tented arch. You can see that's a really good example of a tented arch. But this one is something else. We're not quite sure what they are. They're incredibly rare fingerprint patterns. So there's an enormous amount of variation that can be found in these different patterns. And they do look very odd and very weird. So what I want to do for you guys is kind of really hard to do this um, through the Zoom call. So you're all interested in your fingerprints. So what I want to invite you to do is if you take a photograph of your hand, you can email it to me and I will tell you what your fingerprint patterns are. And then and I'll send you a little write-up about it too. Unfortunately, it will be in English. But if you'd like that, you can send me an email with a photograph of your fingerprints. How does that sound? Does that sound like a good idea? All right, cool. Now, um, of course, the other thing you can do is you can wait for my book to come out, but that might take a while. My book's coming out in January, and I'll just show you a little bit about what the book what the book's in, what's in the book, and what's going on in there. All right, so I'll just show you that now. All right, so the book that I've written is called The Palmistry of Fingerprint Patterns. So you can see that's the title of it there. That's the cover. And in the book, I talk about all the different fingerprint patterns and what they mean, but I talk about the meaning of every fingerprint pattern on every finger. So you can work out the psychological significance of the fingerprint patterns. There are also patterns that occur in your palm. So we will be able to look at the patterns in your palm, and there are all patterns are under the fingers and in the base of the palm as well, and they all have very specific significations as well. There's a chapter on the medical significance of fingerprint patterns and also about your personal identity and your karmic path as well. So it kind of covers a whole range of different aspects of fingerprints from genetics to medical qualities to anthropology to psychology. But if I've written it as a book so that you can go through the book and identify the fingerprint patterns and work out what fingerprint patterns you have on your fingers. And then it gives you the capacity for interpreting them as well. So I've written a paragraph of the psychological significance of each pattern and a paragraph outlining the meaning of each fingerprint pattern when it's found on each finger. And then a whole section on the meaning of all the patterns that you find in the palm and how commonly they occur and what they all mean as well. The first thing to do really when you're looking at the prints is to find out what your dominant fingerprint pattern are. Are you a dominant loop person? Are you a dominant whirl person? Or are you a dominant arch person? Or is your hand dominated by the one single individual pattern that you have that's a bit different? We need to know the significance of the distributions of the fingerprint patterns, how common and rare they are. The more rare the fingerprint pattern, the more important it is as as a signifier of what it is to be you. A couple of appendices include the embryogenesis of fingerprints. Then done some write-ups of the fingerprint patterns of some famous people, including Jimi Hendrix and John Lennon and Malcolm X. And if you want to order the book, you can get it from the publisher directly or from Amazon, and it's available online right now for ordering. So you can actually order it. It's only in English at the moment, but it will be translated into Portuguese at some point. And if you want to get hold of me, you can get hold of me through any of these channels. Or you can just email me, masterhandreader@gmail.com as well. All right, so Deborah's raised her hand. Deborah has a question, I presume. Deborah, what do you want to say?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So once you're trying to see the pattern, you need to look at your 10 fingers, like all of them, or just in one hand to be the dominate one?
Yes, exactly. Good question. All right. So the question now is, do you need to look at all your fingerprint patterns or just the one in your dominant hand? Well, yes, all of them. So the way I work with this is the way I work with this is I say you add up the total on all the digits. So the first thing is what's the total out of 10? That tells you your general type. The second thing is you must look at the fingerprint on the index finger because the index finger is the most varied fingerprint. There's more divergence on this finger than any other finger. And also, the fingerprint on the index finger shows your sense of identity. So in some ways, that fingerprint pattern is the most important fingerprint pattern because it's what the person will identify with. The third thing is you need to look at which finger is different, which one is the odd one out, which one kind of shouldn't be there, which one is the fingerprint pattern that's kind of uh, unusual. And to know that, you need to know how common or rare a fingerprint pattern is. So there's a guy in America called Andres Washington. He has been studying fingerprints completely independently of me for about 40 years. And he studies the rarity of fingerprint patterns. And what he's found is that rare and unusual people have rare and unusual fingerprints. That's how I got the hold of the fingerprints of John Lennon and Jimi Hendrix and Malcolm X, because he has them all on his website. And how does he have them? Because he has access to the FBI database. So he has access to a database of 18 million fingerprint patterns.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I have a database of maybe 2,000, 2,000 hands, maybe, so whatever, 20,000 prints, but
Because it's a
even the
really interesting
database,
mix that you
yeah,
find
yeah,
in here. Like it's confusing even because is in like in some hands is dominating one type, the other hands dominated, but like the
yeah.
thumbs normally they are
Yes,
swirl,
exactly.
and
Yeah,
then you say, well, I don't have a like a dominant one. I have all of them,
yeah.
but it's
So that's
really
so that's
interesting.
that's where it gets a little bit complex, but that's what I explain in the book. So I explain in the
Mm.
book how to process that information. The first thing is
Okay.
identification. What type have I got?
Yep.
The
Yep.
second, sorry, my internet's gone a bit unstable. Did you hear that last bit? I'll just repeat that last bit in case it got lost. You got it. Okay. So, and that's what's interesting about Andrews Washington because he studied Eisenhower, um, Richard Nixon, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Jimi Hendrix, Billie Holiday, John Lennon, all these Elvis Presley, Einstein, all these interesting and unusual people all have interesting and unusual fingerprints. And so his study is about the correlations mathematically. He's a statistician, it's called quite mathematical. But so I was working with him when I wrote the book because that's how I got the handprints, and we've been exchanging a lot of information on this particular topic. Um, so I've kind of created some rules in the book for how you approach that, but to simply to begin with, look at all the fingerprint patterns, add them up out of 10. And if you have 7 or more loops, you're a loop dominant person. If you have 5 or more whorls, you're a whirl dominant person. If you have 3 or more arches, you're an arch dominant person. And if you have any of the minor dermatoglyphics, those will dominate just because they're so rare anyway.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. But if you send me a photograph of your fingerprints, I will work it all out for you and I can send you a little report for free. Okay.
Yeah,
So
it's
I'm
just a
happy to.
bit confusing with the arch and the tented arch, like could be really you really confuse if it's a tent. But
Yeah.
yeah, I have like kind of similar thumbs are wheels, the index and middle finger are kind of tent and loops. Yeah, so I have a little bit of everything. But I don't know if it's the tented
Okay.
or just the normal arc.
Okay. Well, you send me the photograph on Deborah and I will
Okay.
answer that for you. Okay. No
Yeah,
problem at all.
I'll take that. It's better like a clean finger like that or like a
Yeah.
painted one?
Yeah.
Clean
No, no,
one.
just a
Okay.
clean thing, just like that. It's easy. That's easiest. Yeah. Photograph
Okay.
like that. Yeah. Cool.
Thank you.
No worries. Anybody else got any other questions? All right, so that's good. All right, so we'll just wrap it up then because I mean we said we'd do about an hour and a half, so we're coming up towards the last bit. So I'll just do some concluding thoughts for everybody because I think it's important to understand the context of all of this. So I think it's interesting. Fingerprints are really interesting because everybody knows that fingerprint patterns are important. More and more these days, we're using our fingerprints for our phones or for going through passport control and stuff like that. So there's a recognition. The fingerprint patterns are very unique biometric markers of our individuality, and this has been recognized for about 120 years. There's about 100 years research into the genetics of fingerprint patterns, and the medical significance of fingerprint patterns. And there's been some scientific research into the psychological significance of it, but it's people like Andrew Washington who've been doing a lot of that pioneering work. And the thing is that we know two things about fingerprint patterns. We know that they don't change, so then we know that they're markers of our identity. So it's inconceivable that if these are patterns of our identity, that they shouldn't have be some kind of reflection of who and what we are. Our physical being, our bodies, are a reflection of who and what we are. We're tall, thin people, we're short, fat people, whatever shape of our body. Our body is the hologram of what it is to be an individual. The body is, in fact, the marker of us as individual human beings because we are differentiated by having a physical body. So it's not that difficult to understand that the body can is descriptive of us. We recognize people by the fact their faces are different. This is just recognizing people by the fact that their fingerprints are different. But what's significant about the fingerprint patterns is they are totally unique to us. And when you study the hands of identical twins don't have identical fingerprint patterns. So even at that level of genetic and compatibility, the identical twins don't have the same fingerprint patterns. They also don't have the same lines on their hands either. There's differences in the lines too, but the we're just focusing on the fingerprint patterns today. So what that tells us is that the fingerprint patterns are descriptive of that which is completely unique to us. And if we can understand what that pattern is and what that force of energy is, that will enable us to live a life that's kind of true to who and what we are. So that's a challenge, I think, for most people. Most people are convinced or persuaded by propaganda, by government, by education, by parents, by social pressure, by social media and social pressures to be in a certain kind of way. The one virtue about fingerprint patterns is it allows us to express who and what we are from the inside coming outwards. These are qualities that we have within us. They're psychological, they're emotional. The fingerprint can show our skills and abilities, they show our natural aptitudes. So there's a kind of orientation that we have towards the world that if we're aligned with that, then our life can be an expression of those qualities that come from within us. And that's really, really powerful. And that's kind of what I've written the book for, is to make it as an easier way to understand those patterns so that people can read the book, look at their own fingerprint patterns, know what their special skills are, and also read the hands of their friends and talk to them about what they're like too. And it's amazing what you'll discover about your friends when you understand the fingerprint patterns and what their motivations are. So if you get a copy of the book, you better do all that yourself. But I hope today you've learned something about your fingerprint patterns. And as I say, the offer for everyone who's attended today is if you send me a photograph of your fingerprint patterns, I will tell you what your fingerprint patterns are and offer you a little brief explanation of what they're all about. So I just want to say thank you to everybody for coming along. And I want to say particularly thank you to Joao for organizing today and for doing the interpretation work. It's been a big job for him today. So thank you all very much for your time and your attention. I hope you've enjoyed it and found something interesting and that you learned something today.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Wonderful.